What's up? It's your boy Kevin to turn on this motherfucking YouTube shit. Wow, what the fuck?
What's up? It's your boy Kevin to turn on YouTube shit. Hey man, we are lit, man. Turn. Today, it's motherfucker day. Show here outside. Big crib in it. Gang, show here outside shit, man. Free Palestine, free Congo, Russia, do your thing, and Texas stand the fuck up. Each day is a new day to be a better version of yourself. Never let somebody bring you down, always fight back. And never let somebody tell you who you are, but also never put yourself in a position you don't belong. Let's stay humble. Let's get on revolution, on the movement. Keep Yahweh first. Coming to the Black Hebrew Israelite as a real Jew. We out here. Alright. Boom. Today, it's motherfucking day. Show hood outside. Big crib in it. Gang, show hood outside shit, man. Turn up. Hey, man. Bruh, a lot been going on in this rap scene. It's like a lot of these rappers are getting targeted. You know what I'm saying? Targeted individuals. So we got the Youngthugg situation. So the last person in the trial, he got a 75-piece combo with no drink, extra salt, and extra crispy. They gave that nigga a 75-year life sentence. I guess that's the last nigga on trial for the YSL case. Crazy. We also got Thugg talking about he might be quitting rap. He said he want to quit and start streaming. Hey man, I've been knowing streaming was gonna be the next biggest thing. If you ever look back into my streams, I was doing streams. I knew streaming was gonna be the next biggest thing. Also, Crip, this gonna tell you a lot about Youngthugg and where he came from and how these fans can't write Youngthugg out so easily. Let's get into it.
I think that's 75 years to serve. To serve 40 followed by 15. I don't know what the math comes out to be, but
20 to serve 10.
20 to serve 10. Concurrent. 10 to serve concurrent. 5 to serve concurrent with count 1. So that's a total of 20 served 10 right there. 10 probated. All right. Count 32 is 30 years to serve consecutive to count 1. So that's another 30 to serve. Count 33, 20 to serve concurrent with count 32. 34, 10 concurrent with count 32. So right now we're at 50, serve 30. Yes. If there's 30 to serve.
40.
To serve 40. Because it's 20 to serve 10.
Clearly this is why lawyers end up lawyers and not scientists or mathematicians, although it's the yes, consecutive to count 1, which is 10 to serve. So that's 50 serve 40 at this point. Count 39 is 20 serve 15 concurrent with 32. So that's not any additional time to serve. So, and then 47 is 10 probated consecutive to 32. 48 is 10 probated concurrent with 47. And 36 is 5 consecutive to 37 probated. So that's
consecutive to 47?
Yes. at least 65 to 40.
And was that wrong concurrent with his current sentence?
How long is he going to actually serve on that sentence?
I understand it to say 40 days.
45 years.
45.
Stop doing music, I'm sorry, straight.
For real? No, don't do that. Then they're gonna blame me.
We can swap lives, all of
No,
us.
no.
We'll start making music, you stream.
Don't do that. They're gonna.
I think I'm gonna start streaming.
No, don't do that. They're gonna get mad at me.
Wait,
please.
hold on, yeah.
No, they're gonna kill
This
us.
looks bad.
No, please.
I want to just start streaming. Cause y'all live like a cool life. Like crazy
But you
stuff.
live a crazy life.
Shout out to Dom Kowalski. Is the fans turning on Youngthugg? Are the fans making Youngthugg change his rapping to streaming? Is he quitting rap?
Damn, Thugg done beat Rico and came out lame as hell. Youngthugg's run since getting out, showing DJ Khaled barely being able to play basketball. Ever since Thugg got out of jail, showing a picture that says, when you find out your goat is washed. After Youngthugg came home after the YSL Rico, fans expected him to make a grand return, a first day out single, an album, a tour, and even reunite everyone's favorite artists again. But it has been far from that. He dropped a single which fans laughed at
Thugg
for
came
being
and say shit. He came and
boring,
fart, and people gonna say
repeatedly
shit.
calling Gunna a rat, even though Thugg also took a plea deal, signing upcoming Atlanta artist 9 victims who has disturbing allegations against him, and most recently, even labeling Kid Cudi as a rat for testifying against Diddy. It's been a complete mess for Thugg ever since he got out, and with him planning to drop his album next month, it's not looking too great for him. So let's bring it all the way back to the May of 2022, pretty much 3 years ago from now. Youngthugg, Gunna, and 28 other YSL associates were charged in a 56-count Georgia RICO. Now, of course, everyone was devastated. Thugg is seen as an Atlanta legend, not only putting out hits and albums people loved, but also being seen as an inspiration to multiple generations of artists, whether it be the likes of Uzi, Carti, and Lil Baby claiming they all look up to Thugg, or even this new generation with the likes of Yeep, Ken Carson, and Sofago. And the thing with Thugg's career at that point in time was, even though he was already deep into the game, numbers-wise, he was just entering his peak. In 2019, he achieved his first number one album with So Much Fun, selling 131,000 units in its first week, followed up by Slime Language 2 and Punk in the following years, which also landed at the number 1 position in the Billboard 200 albums chart, which completely outperformed anything he put out in the past. Before So Much Fun, Thugg had never cracked the top spot or 6-figure openings.
That's what I'm saying.
As Thugg was incarcerated,
Thugg really got so much more he can accomplish.
Expecting this RICO to make even more buzz around his name, allowing him to come home greater and bigger than ever. If he gets out and drop an album, I can honestly see him.
If that nigga would have came out with some heat about the jet, I don't know why they don't rap about what's going on.
I mean, we've seen it before. When a rapper gets locked up and then eventually freed, it creates this huge anticipation as fans haven't heard anything from them in such a long time. And not only did the actual arrest of Thugg and Gunna have mainstream attention, but also all the events surrounding the trial. Truly humble under God, Thugg's music being played in the courtroom, Gunna supposedly snitching, Lil Woody's theatrics on the stand. It was like some sort of TV show. And I mean, his labels even dropping his music throughout his time away. Singles with the likes of Pete, Calvin Harris, and Mariah the Scientist. Even dropping an entire Metro Boomin curated album, Business Business. However, none of these had that real hype or feeling, as it wasn't actually Thugg dropping the music. It was people behind the scenes. And now, let's move on to Youngthugg's release from jail, because this is where the real controversy starts. So Thugg would end up getting 15 years of probation, which many saw as a success. He is able to go straight home after facing life
some of the niggas in jail, man, getting the motherfucking bucket numbers thrown at him.
Affect how he would go about his career. No Metro Atlanta for 10 years, no contact with anyone he knows to be in a criminal street gang or with any co-defendant, except his brother and Gunna for contractual music business, cannot promote a gang on social media, no use of gang hand signs, lingo or symbolism, zero good arms reach of him, random drug streets.
They can't stop
so that's just some of them. ones that I think would impact his career the most, because we all know a large portion of Thugg's image is guns, drugs, and street activity. So with Thugg literally being banned from associating himself with that, everyone thought he was going to be sent straight back to jail for violating his parole, with fans suggesting he's going to have to do a career makeover. He better start making gospel music. But most people weren't really concerned about that yet. They were just happy that the legend was home. However, his return didn't go as fans expected, as days passed after his release on the 31st of October in 2024, and fans got nothing. Some were arguing to relax, as he has just spent 2 years in a cell by himself. He probably just wants to spend some time with his family and enjoy his freedom. But then came something that severely concerned fans, as on the 3rd of November, Thugg would tweet, "Let's drop one of these rats, Peter," which is obviously quite stupid, as this is the kind of vague, aggressive language that could easily be interpreted as a violation of his probation terms. Here he is basically saying he wants to put a snitch to sleep, presumably targeting his gunner. Now, whilst Thugg thought he was looking cool, tweeting out threats like this, well, fans began literally clowning him for putting out stuff like this.
Man, they trying to get that nigga a 40 piece
back to carry out a 15-year sentence for violating his parole terms. This fella doesn't like being free. Bro ain't making it that 15 years with his energy, and he would only continue to make it worse for himself, as just a week later he would tweet, "Gonna stop acting like we friends on the internet, I don't know you, my guy," which is of course directed at his YSL signee, who he is no longer on good terms with, as he allegedly snitched on Thugg and his label after taking an altered plea deal in which he admitted why he's on his gang and needs to end. Now fans argue whether he snitched or he didn't, but it's clear Thugg and his people don't mess with him anymore. But that's not even the problem here. It's the fact he continues to put out tweets which don't look too great in court. He would end up saying he was hacked as more tweets were sent out, with one of them even trolling the state, saying he's in Metro Atlanta. But that may have just been a terrible excuse he came up with. But apart from playing with his freedom and even having girlfriend issues, Thugg was not releasing any music. Well, that was until the 3rd of January in 2025, as Thugg would feature on Lil Baby's album Wham on the song Dumb Dumb and Dumb alongside Future, which at first had insane hype, as of course it was the first official Thugg verse since his arrest all the way back in 2022. And I mean, the song was hard. However, people also felt the song was boring and generic. Kinda mid, feel like I'm being gaslit by all the hype. I feel like this is just a typical song, like Thugg and Future do well, but it just feels run of the mill. And I mean, I think we can understand what people are saying.
If Richard would have came out some crazy shit,
also pretty similar
yelling and
to what we
spazzing
got
on the
before,
mic,
which, you know, is not a bad thing,
shit, we
but
would have
it
been
was
like,
supposed to be this big moment,
what the
Thugg
fuck
happened since his arrest, but it just didn't end up having that feel it was supposed to. Well, it will be after this that Thugg would begin rolling out his next album, Quttin. Metro putting out tweets stating he's working on the next album, Thugg announcing his first show since his release, plastering Quttin on social media, with Future also showing support, and with him also featuring on Playboi Carti's music album, even though it was originally a 2021 verse from a song Thugg recorded with Gunna, it still gave Thugg that hype he needed, and it seemed like he was properly rebuilding his hype and gearing up to drop his first official album since his arrest in 2022. However, he would actually end up making things worse for himself, as on Twitter, Youngthugg would call out Marissa Burrito, an investigator with the Atlanta Police Department, calling her the biggest liar in the DA office, whilst attaching a picture of her, which backfired immediately, as District Attorney Fannie Willis filed a motion claiming Thugg has engaged in conduct that directly threatens the safety of witnesses and prosecutors, compromises ongoing legal proceedings, and warrants immediate revocation of probation. As after he put out the tweet, people online started leaking her address, personal information, and even made threats against her. So basically, they want Thugg back in jail due to this tweet. Now, of course, Thugg is not responsible for the action of other people, so the judge would deny the request, as his own tweet wasn't anything bad. However, it was definitely on the riskier side, with the judge even suggesting Thugg to be careful with what he says about certain topics. While the court does not find that the cited social media post rises to the level of a violation, it may be prudent for Williams to exercise restraint regarding certain topics, with Thugg himself ending off the situation by saying in a tweet he's a good person. I don't make threats to people, I'm a good person. I would never condone any threatening anyone or definitely participate in threatening anyone. I'm all about peace and love. Now look, I just don't know why he's playing with freedom like this. Just a couple months ago he was fighting a case that could have got him life in prison, got out on time served with probation, and now he's risking his freedom again. I just don't understand it. With fans of course having the same opinion about this, just like they had with his previous tweets. Stop doing this or you'll go back to prison or jail. But not only were fans annoyed at Thugg for not dropping music and risking his freedom, but for his newest YSL label signee. The YSL label has been around since around 2016. However, hasn't had many successful artists apart from Gunna. He had Locc, but unfortunately passed away, and even someone like Youngthugg had potential but just didn't drop for a very long time. So now about Gunna or Locc, Thugg needed some new proteges, which led to him signing 1300 Sane and then the very controversial 9 Vicious, who some people call 9 Victims. Born in 2002, the Atlanta native faced allegations of contacting minors. I'm prob waiting to 18 to do that. Don't ever post again looking that good. I love you. Come over. Oh, your age? Yes, I forgot, but I'll still talk to you and be your friend. These are the messages 9 Vicious sent to a 16-year-old whilst he was 19. Now, even though a 3-year age gap isn't the same as a 30-year-old man trying to meet a literal kid he met through Roblox, it's still not morally right, especially with him even admitting he will wait till she's 18.
Well, I mean,
and
the
also
parents don't say shit. I mean, it's what it is.
For people of those ages to, and they continue to get worse for him.
Because
well,
19-year-olds in high
as his
school.
response to these allegations, bruh, and a bunch of soul emojis. Anyways, show finna be crazy. But that's not it, as later in a song from his project, Tumblr Music, he would say, I know I effed up, I admit it, I was horny, which is a terrible response to allegations that could be career-ending. And with Thugg then publicly co-signing him in a tweet where he wrote his lyrics, fans would be pretty disappointed. Worst thing you've ever done. So we're just letting the group go, Thugg? Yeah, you gotta go back to jail, man. Now, some people may use the excuse
he was 19, bitch, he could've been high school.
Sure he definitely does, as he retweets and responds to fans often. So he definitely reads his replies. So yeah, of course, this is not a great look for Thugg. It obviously won't really change people's opinion of him, but definitely still quite odd. But this is also rap, where you can pretty much get away with anything as long as people like your music. Because 9 Vicious is still having a great career, considering how long he's been out for. I mean, I don't think he even has like 300,000 monthly listeners, and he's already signed to Youngthugg. Anyways, after all that drama, 6 months since his release from jail, Thugg would drop his first single out, Money on Money, featuring Future, where fans were hoping for a fire single to set off the album rollout. But fans were sort of disappointed. It's not that the song was bad, but underwhelming. I love Thugg, but am I the only one that thinks it's underwhelming? I don't know, let's wait till the album. These geezers need to try something new. Holy F, what a snooze. When is this sound gonna die for the love of God? And not only did people think the song was boring, but fans were annoyed Thugg was once again sending shots at Gunna on this track. These F fellas are telling for nothing, and I gotta be the one calling them friends. With Thugg's influence, you would expect fans to be siding with him. However, if you check the replies, everyone's actually defending Gunna. He didn't tell. Chill on Gunna, not gonna lie, you'll both be the system, just squash it now. Gunna took a plea deal, buddy over here called him a rat. Just for him,
ain't take no plea deal, that nigga snitch.
Thugg must have wanted to be the first fella to get that plea bargain. And I feel like the big reason of why fans are siding with Gunna is because since he was released, he's been on fire. He had FU Mean, which peaked at a number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100, a huge hit. Then many hit songs from his second album after his release, One of One, such as One On One Tonight, and Hakuna Matata. And even though some people are now clowning Gunna for putting out Get Ready With Me music, Instagram Reels music, it's working. Whereas
niggas start losing weight and everything.
Anyways, back to Thugg. It seemed like fans were getting tired. and unfortunately, he would continue with his stupid antics. On the 22nd of May, artist Kid Cudi would be subpoenaed to testify against Diddy about an alleged Molotov cocktail attack he carried out on his Porsche. Well, this is where Thugg would step in and tweet, "Damn, Cudi a rap," which honestly felt like a breaking point for people on social media, because Thugg got absolutely cooked for this. Youngthugg almost 40 and still got the mindset of a child. Damn, Thugg done beat a Rico and came out lame as hell. I'm telling your son, we gotta start acknowledging the fact some fellas just on earth to hold black people back. I mean, there's a lot to break down about the situation. Firstly, well, Cudi isn't a street dude and has never acted like one. And second of all, he was subpoenaed, meaning he was called up to court and legally had to turn up to testify. Otherwise, they would have thrown him in jail. So with everything that we've so far, I think we can easily say most people are disappointed with Youngthugg since his release from jail. You know, it was such a big moment. The legendary rapper facing life imprisonment got off on probation and is ready to make the craziest return to the rap game. Just for him to give a feature to Lil Baby, a 2021 verse on a Carti album, drop a generic song with Future, and put out stupid tweets.
I mean, at least he putting some shit out.
Personally, I thought the first day Thugg got released, he was going to drop some crazy song which was going to go viral. Now, I understand why he didn't.
Came on that bitch, started screaming and shit.
He probably just wants to rest and see his family.
Shit.
And of course, with his terms, he has to be careful with what he says. So I get that. But it's been like 6 months now, and to be fair, he's about to drop his album, which was actually supposed to drop in May, but got pushed back, with some fans even believing it got pushed back because no one really cared about it.
UI Scooty, his return album, his first album since coming home from jail, you know, that album that everyone was hyping up before it even existed, was supposed to come out this Friday. I bet some of you watching this video didn't know that. Nobody was talking about it. It wasn't a big deal. Everyone was acting like they didn't care. It just wasn't talked about because felt like people didn't care. Now, Youngthugg has pushed the album back to June, and I think that that is actually part of the reason as to why it's been pushed back.
And even though his album's not even released yet, it was already under attack after it was confirmed that 21 Savage was featuring on the project, which just had many fans thinking, oh great, another generic trap album with features from the same artists, Lil Baby, Future, and 21 Savage. Which again isn't a terrible thing, but you know, with Thugg, people were hoping for something experimental.
I mean, young Scooter died, and Rich Homie,
I guess we'll have to wait and see. Let me know what you guys think. Are you excited for Thugg's album? Personally, I'll check it out. I'm not like a crazy Youngthugg fan. He's a bit before my time. Like, I've listened to his albums. I probably have like 20 or 30 songs liked by him on Spotify, but I'm not an avid fan of him compared to someone like Uzi or Carti. But again, that's due to my age. But another issue I think there is with Youngthugg is like there's a lot of people who like the idea of Youngthugg or just follow the hype of Thugg because they know he's a respected figure, but only a minority of those people actually check out his music.
He can actually rap though,
like everyone knows he's a super influential dude, so they just kind of have to like and respect him. I think just one of those situations where Thugg's influence, name, and image is just bigger than his actual music. Like, he's still a huge artist that, you know, that can pull crazy numbers, but maybe just not as big as we think. Because if we look at his album sales, he's never really reached the heights of someone like Lil Baby, Carti, Uzi. He's, you know, his highest selling album is 130,000. So yeah, let me know what you guys think. What do you think of Thugg's run since he was released, and will you be checking out his album? And I even saw fans compare Youngboy's release from jail and how he did it pretty much perfectly, and it's what Thugg should have done. Youngboy announced a huge nationwide arena tour, dropped a bunch of songs including features from Ye and Carti, obviously creating insane buzz around his name. Like, I don't even listen to Youngboy, but after I heard Alive with Carti and Ye, I checked out the other stuff he put out recently. I mean, Thugg might do the same too. Maybe his album will be crazy, loads of hits, goes on a tour, and takes shit for the game. We'll have to wait and see. Hope you guys enjoyed. Like, subscribe, comment, have a great day, and I'll see you guys in the next one.
Gang, 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 man, they want Youngthugg gone, man. But his legacy, man, speaks for itself.
Influential artists of all time. Some people might say Van Gogh, the man who pioneered the future of art with bold, expressive colors and emotional paintings of the French countryside. Other people might say Prince, the flamboyant, androgynous guitarist with the voice of an angel. Other people would say the Beatles, the rock band who transformed popular music forever with their innovative songwriting and production, and some people would say Youngthugg, the rapper from Atlanta who came and turned hip-hop upside down forever. Seriously though, Youngthugg has become by far the most influential rapper to come out of Atlanta in the last 15 years of him making music, which also means he's ended up influencing an entire generation of rappers and even pop stars. But when Youngthugg showed up in Atlanta in the early 2010s, he was quickly rejected by the outside world. His music was massively weird, if not just downright incomprehensible. But just like Van Gogh, whose style was considered illegitimate during his lifetime, or the Beatles, who were mocked and laughed when they first came out, Youngthugg is yet another example of a powerful artist being considered nothing but a joke when they first come onto the scene. So the question is, how did Youngthugg transform from a misunderstood outsider into one of the most influential artists alive? And how did he go from the most violent housing projects to fine art museums around the world? Why is he one of the most influential but still misunderstood artists of our time, both literally and metaphorically? This is the story of Youngthugg. In the summer of 1991, a kid named Jeffrey Lamar Williams was born on the south side of Atlanta, Georgia. And the Atlanta he was growing up in the 90s and 2000s was a place of extreme energy. On the one hand, it was becoming the center of the new era of hip-hop. When Jeffrey was a baby in 1994, Outkast dropped their debut album, and after years of the East and West Coast dominating the airwaves, Atlanta exploded with creative energy. The city became the capital of unique, expressive personalities telling colorful stories about street life in a way that had never been done before. But on the other hand, the street life that served as the source of inspiration for the city's rising stars was a whole other story. Once being called the city in a forest with 48% of the city's land being covered in trees, Atlanta has always had a unique layout. That can mean beautiful, wealthy neighborhoods with mansions and parks throughout the city, but on the other side of the coin, its most dangerous areas are often called dark and menacing. Combining the countless secluded winding streets with Atlanta's long history of racism and redlining, and what you get is some of the most infamous ghettos in modern America. And one tiny island in Atlanta's sea of trees was Jonesboro South, the housing project that Jeff and his 10 siblings would grow up in from birth. Jonesboro South was widely known as one of the worst places to live in Georgia, with everyday life being consumed by crime, addiction, and violence. With so much of the city being plagued by generational poverty, urban decay, and a lack of opportunities, hundreds of thousands of residents were left trapped in a cycle where making it out was an elusive dream. Youngthugg lived in Jonesboro until he was 17. At which point, they tore the entire place down and sent people to live somewhere else rather than try the monumental task of cleaning it up. He would later say, "There's nothing there now, just grass. We stayed until they closed it and started knocking down the buildings on the last day." As a little kid, even from his earliest memories, he's surrounded by things that most Americans have never experienced and will only ever see through a screen, if they're aware of it at all. He would later say, "Anything you see wrong with me came from the projects, Jonesboro South." With a thin but prominent scar on his right cheekbone, he says, "Jonesboro, you know how roaches look, and rats, right? It was worse than struggle. That shit was hell." Because growing up in the projects with 10 siblings meant a life of constant struggle for Thugg and his family. It wasn't a place where childhood innocence was going to last for very long.
My mom had 11 kids out of her womb, so it's like the most, we stayed in projects, so it's an apartment. So, the most rooms in an apartment is 5 rooms. It's never going to be over 5 rooms in an apartment. So,
a lot of sharing beds and all that, right?
And she adopted 2 of my cousins. So 2 of my cousins stayed with us also. We was probably like 18 people in a 5-bedroom apartment.
Damn, bitch. And so it becomes easy to see why the youngest of 11 kids would start acting a certain way when you look at what he was surrounded by for most of his life. By the time he was in high school, he ended up fighting with a teacher in a classroom and breaking his arm, which led to 4 years in daytime juvenile detention.
Rough motherfucking place, huh? Yeah. Nicknamed the Lil Haiti for a reason. For financial and stability reasons. Man, we got the name. That's what we got the name. We came up with the name because of that. How close it was to how we was. Like the way I was raised, the way I lived, the way my house looked, the way everything around me looked and felt.
When he was 9 years old, his older brother Benny was killed in front of him. His lawyer would tell the story in court many years later. A 9-year-old boy sees his brother Benny collapsed on the ground after being shot in the chest. Someone calls 911, but when the police finally arrive, they don't rush to help him. Instead, they handcuff the boy's mother, who's screaming and crying hysterically. They push her to the ground. When the cops finally go over to Benny, they just put a sheet over his face. His father also spent time in and out of prison while he was a kid. But Jeffrey was different. Even from a young age, he was quickly becoming someone with a mind and a vision of his own. When he was 12 years old, he got punished for wearing his sister's shoes. Later say, "When I was 12, my feet feet were small enough that I wore my sister's glitter shoes. My dad would whoop me and say, "You can't go to school like that because you'll embarrass us." But I never gave a fuck what people thought. And never caring what people thought would quickly become his greatest asset in a world designed for him to fail. It might sound like a kid who wears girls' clothing and fights with teachers is the last person who would ever escape the hood and become a star. But in reality, that tendency, that ability to do whatever he wanted no matter what anyone thought, would end up being his greatest strength. And in the late 2000s, when he was a kid, Atlanta rap was becoming bigger than ever. And for someone like Youngthugg, watching people from his side of town find huge success and achieve things that no one else around him ever had, it started to look like one of the only ways that he might be able to have a chance at changing his life. But it just so happened to be the case that Youngthugg was born with the ability to come up with insane melodies off the top of his head. He would later describe it in a nonchalant way, like he was trying to play it cool, saying, "Anyone can rap if you've got brains, so I just went with it." But the journey he was about to go on would get a whole lot deeper than that. The very first Youngthugg song that you can still find anywhere online is from about 15 years ago, in early 2010, when he was 18 years old, years before he even started posting his own music. But it's actually kind of great. This early song is a feature verse on a single from Cash Out, another rapper from Thugg's area, and it was so early on in Thugg's career that he barely even looks like Youngthugg, let alone sounds like him. Despite him now being in prison for sex trafficking, in 2010, Cash Out was much more known than Youngthugg. Thugg hadn't even decided how he wanted to spell his name yet, with Youngthugg being written as Y-U-N-G at the beginning of the video. And in this song, Thugg's sing-songy verse is pretty catchy, even though it's basically a different genre of music versus what he makes now.
No, I go to work in the kitchen like mouse. And when I'm talking real, and I think I need a spouse. And when you know I'm real up on the first and but when I had to go.
And while this track is pretty much forgotten nowadays, hearing him before he had achieved any fame at all is pretty interesting, especially when you realize that even on the very first song he was ever featured on, Thugg was already starting to outshine the artists around him. And then, about a year after the track with Cash Out, Youngthugg dropped his first mixtape, I Came From Nothing. He didn't really sound like himself yet. Honestly, this entire mixtape feels like a tribute to Lil Wayne, not just in his vocal delivery, but the flows as well. At certain points in this mixtape, it's hard to tell the difference. In a lot of the verses, he's structuring each line with a little punchline at the end, and it just really makes me feel like I'm listening to old Lil Wayne songs, to the point where I even hear Wayne in his voice more than I hear Youngthugg.
Wayne, and Wayne. I won't listen to that now. The fact that the nigga got like 100 M's and he still rap every day.
Damn.
It's amazing.
But by the time he came out with I Came From Nothing 3, a year after that, he sounds a lot more like himself. The vocals became more eccentric, with unpredictable cadences, strange inflections, and high-pitched melodies and ad-libs. The flows switched from laid back to sharp and then back again, unlike the setup, punchline flow he was doing over and over before. Honestly though, especially with Came From Nothing 2 and 3, I can really see how hardcore Youngthugg fans would love these projects, just off how you can really see Thugg's evolution start to come together, even when he was so inexperienced.
Man,
by the time he made the third mixtape, he sounds much more spontaneous and confident. One person who has a couple features on this mixtape series is Future. At the time, he also didn't have a studio album out yet, having just dropped Tony Montana a few months earlier. When he was making these mixtapes, Youngthugg's career was about as deep in the trenches as he could possibly get. He basically wasn't known by the outside world at all. He was working with a local manager named Bobby Patterson, who had a creative studio in Atlanta, and business-wise, they were at a level where Bobby was just posting his phone number on their YouTube channel so you could call him up and book Thugg for a show if you wanted to. As far as his public profile went, that was it. A lot of these videos today have millions of views from Thugg's cult fan base, but back then, they weren't getting much more than a couple hundred. But when Youngthugg was a kid, all the way up to when he was 20 years old dropping these mixtapes, one of the most influential and powerful rappers in Atlanta was Gucci Mane. Over the years, Gucci Mane got pretty big. He's been on massive hits like Wake Up in the Sky, Black Beatles with Ray Shremmerd. He's worked with artists like The Weeknd, Mariah Carey, and Usher, but he never really sold out. He stayed tapped in with his hometown in Atlanta, even after he had pretty huge mainstream success. After starting his own label in 2007 underneath Warner, he successfully signed countless rappers and producers out of Atlanta, like Waka Flocka Flame, Zaytoven, Lex Luger, Young Scooter, Chief Keef, Southside, Nicki Minaj, Migos, Future, Metro Boomin, Soulja Boy. To be real, Gucci basically ran Atlanta and signed a lot of artists that came out of the city for 15 years.
Who? Elton John. That's dope.
Running shit like that. Was running shit like that.
That's dope. I went to his house. He's like, let me ask you this.
One of the artists he signed over the years was Pee Wee Longway, known for songs like Preach It, Fiji Water, and also being in a rap trio with Gucci and Young Dolph called Felix Brothers. And Pee Wee Longway just so happened to have also grown up in Jonesboro South, being Youngthugg's neighbor when they were little kids, years before the music.
Youngthugg and me, same project, same everything. Whatever he doing, I'm on his bumpers. Whatever I'm doing, he on my bump. We locked in, so yeah.
But the story goes that Pee Wee eventually brought Thugg to Gucci Mane's studio to show him the mixtape that Thugg had been working on in 2012. But Gucci already trusted Pee Wee enough that he took $25,000 out of his backpack, gave it to Thugg, and signed a contract with him right then and there without ever having heard any of his music. He would later say, when Pee Wee got to the studio, he brought Youngthugg and 2 other guys, and he said, listen, they're hard. They're the ones that got me to start rapping, so sign them. And I had a bag with some money, and I got $25,000 out, and I signed Thugg right there. I had never even heard a song from him.
I told him, I said, listen, I'm gonna sign you. I said, I'm just gonna give you a shot. I said, I don't care if you can rap or not. I know you can hustle, so we're gonna just hustle the music. I'm gonna work with you. I didn't even know if he wrote his music. I really just wanted to help Pee Wee.
But when someone gives you money and access to a studio and lets you do your own thing, not everyone knows what to do with that, no matter how talented they are, especially a young kid who doesn't have the real work experience in that way. But I think we've already established that Youngthugg was different. And so after he met Gucci Mane, he wasn't going to be an unknown Atlanta rapper for long. Gucci later said, I didn't even really know what I had with Thugg. I was just taking a chance. But a week later, I realized he's a star, and I need to start putting more focus on him. Because back in early 2013, when Thugg first signed to 1017 Records, he literally went right into a recording studio and never left. And I mean that literally.
That same day, Thugg then leave the studio. He spent the night down, and then I'll come back, and then he'll have all this, he have his sister, he have 30 people in the studio. But he'll never leave. He just always be there recording.
Even in the early days of his career, the people around Youngthugg would talk about him working all night, every night, nonstop, until he had made thousands of songs.
Do you smoke gas? No way. Do you got nuts? No way. Listen to it.
And then, 2 months after getting signed, he dropped 1017 Thugg, his first official mixtape. Because thanks to the promo and the push he could now get from being on 1017 Records, this mixtape would be the project that showed the world who Youngthugg was. Of course, if you could even understand him at all. Because he suddenly no longer sounded anything like his previous mixtapes, or sometimes like a rapper at all. Or sometimes like a rapper at all. And the song Pikachu would be the first of many Youngthugg songs that would go down in history. People still debate Youngthugg's vocals today, not agreeing if he's trash or a genius, but back then, this song was just insane. It wasn't something that anyone had ever done before. It's not like he was just going in and doing this for attention. It wasn't even something that anyone knew you could get attention from doing. This is just basically not considered rapping at all by the standards of the time. But underneath the insanity was Thugg's ability to actually captivate the listener with hooks and melodies not like anything else you'd ever heard before. Someone would later write, in the middle of Pikachu, Youngthugg spends 2 minutes redefining what hip-hop sounds like, and then some normal rapper comes in and tries to follow it up on the feature. It's hard to not laugh and feel bad for the poor guy who's eternally going to serve as evidence of just how creative Youngthugg was. Rolling Stone ended up naming 1017 Thugg the 5th best mixtape of 2013. Pitchfork would later call it one of the best albums of the first half of the decade, and the song Pikachu would later be ranked as one of the best tracks of the year by Rolling Stone and Spin. Of course, though, none of that would matter at all if the outside world didn't understand him, literally and metaphorically. And so on the one hand, the music magazines and the critics were already calling Youngthugg a genius. They would say things like, Youngthugg's style marries the hook-bending sensibility of Future, the pill-addled yawp of Danny Brown, and the playful irreverence of Lil B under the guiding aura of Lil Wayne. One blogger wrote, he slurs, shouts, whines, and sings, feverishly contorting his voice into a series of odd timbres like a beautifully played but broken wind instrument. His approach is shape-shifting and unstable. At the same time, time, though, he wasn't yet really known outside the online music scene. Atlanta trap music wasn't the massive commercial genre it is now. To put it one way, Youngthugg was averaging about 1,000 likes when he posted on Instagram back then. Basically, blogs and magazines were catching on to what he was doing a lot earlier than the average listener. In 2014, Pitchfork applauded his magnetic presence, his persona, his mystique. In 2013, Consequence of Sound wrote about his off-the-cuff, free-form vocals, giving his music an electric, unfiltered energy. But like I said, that was just on the one hand, because on the other hand, the hatred against Youngthugg was deafening. Because it wasn't just that his rapping had come out of nowhere. That's only one part of it. It was his entire personality, everything he said, every outfit he wore. It was all strange.
Characters who are like larger than life tend to do well. There's the two opposites that do well. You know, you have like your Youngthugg types that are so cartoony, almost not real. But then you've got like your J. Cole types who become popular because they're the everyman. Right? And some people want that. Yeah, you can't be like half weird. You know what I mean? You gotta be either fully weird or just like not.
At the same time as Youngthugg would hold up a machine gun for a photo shoot, he would wear women's V-neck t-shirts and women's skinny jeans and dye his hair pink. Even in just the first year or two of his career, people would talk about him like he was from another world. The mythology around Youngthugg grows every year. Journalists come back with stories about how he eats nothing but junk food, avoids eye contact, and refuses to sit for traditional interviews. His collaborators share wild tales about how he records with exotic animals and makes dozens of songs every day. An endless stream of over-the-top headlines paint the picture of a man who operates on his own wavelength, carrying a gun under his dress, changing his name on a whim, and winning awards for videos he didn't even show up for. And so, sure, a trap rapper in a leopard print dress is gonna piss some people off, but it was also deeper than that. It was all strange enough to the point that a lot of people just didn't even feel he was a real artist. And then people would later talk about how it was basically taboo to be a Youngthugg fan back in 2014. People would say things like, people looked at me like I was remedial for listening to 1017 Thugg in 2014, and I still remember when Lifestyle dropped because the amount of hate he got was crazy. But despite the hatred, he would go on to put out 7 or 8 more mixtapes in the next year and a half. Because what Gucci Mane said about him early on wasn't an exaggeration. Youngthugg basically lived in the studio. He would say, I never leave. All day, every second. Gotta keep the money coming in. And on the one hand, it was for his own good. His manager would say in 2014 that they needed him to keep working so he wouldn't get in trouble with the law. He would say that when he isn't making music, he could be a problem. At the same time, though, when he was in the studio, he was thriving. It was non-stop. Mixtapes like Black Portland, Youngthugg, Purple Album, 1017 Thugg 2 and 3, Rich Gang Part 1 with Rich Homie Quan. And this outpouring of music didn't go unnoticed. Yeah, after one mixtape, he was loved and hated at the same time, but the reactions to his next mixtapes were only gonna get even crazier. 1017 did have a few songs that got some attention, like Pikachu and 2 Cups Stuffed, but Thugg's first real breakout moment into the wider world was Stoner in 2014. A song that's still one of the most memorable songs he ever made, with melodic crooning and stuttering yelping that make it strangely catchy even now. And then a few months after that, the song Danny Glover was another big hit as Thugger spit electric verses on top of a dark, pulsating trap beat. It was very different from Stoner. And then, just a couple of weeks after that, he would drop the most insane and disagreeable song he possibly ever made. Lifestyle was one of the most extreme songs Thugg had made up to that point. It went massively viral, becoming one of the biggest songs to come out of Atlanta back then. But at the same time, the insane hatred that people had for everything he did was only getting stronger. For some people, it was a cool new sound in the trap scene. For others, it was the worst music they had ever heard.
Hey, yo.
It just tell you how many people hate
He said, I like bacon, egg, cheese with mayonnaise.
If you go on forum posts from back in the day when this song came out, this was not being called the classic it is now. People were saying, I can't understand this is garbage, is Youngthugg a dying animal? And it wasn't even coming from random racist online trolls.
Somebody put together a video of him, I think rapping real bad, something like that.
Everybody
making noises. It sounded like Courage the Cowardly Dog, something like that. Something
lifelong, dedicated, serious hip-hop fans were probably angrier than anyone else. For them, the slurred lyrics on Lifestyle were downright offensive. It wasn't real music.
What was that? Got like 4 ounces in the 20. This is in English, right? What's going on in this video? Is the whole concept just about saying a bunch of nonsense syllables? Did a lot of shit just to live this lifestyle. And apparently one of those things wasn't learning to enunciate.
But at the same time, the huge success of the song was almost like a BC and an AD moment for that entire era of music. Yeah, you couldn't understand a single thing Thugg said when it dropped 11 years ago. I remember hearing it as a kid and being like, wow, this is pretty crazy. I can barely understand what he's saying. But if you go back and listen to it today, it sounds pretty normal. If that isn't the definition of influence, I don't know what to tell you. Today, the music video for Lifestyle has 700 million views on YouTube. It has 300 million plays on Spotify. It was one of the big early hits for Thugg's class of artists, and it was proof that his sound was going to be the mainstream, whether people violently clowned on it or not. Because after that, he just kept going and going. A lot of the stuff that Youngthugg did in 2014 and 2015 is still some of the most memorable and iconic trap music ever made. Despite being arguably the most controversial and heavily criticized hip-hop artist at that time, his influence would quickly grow. People online might mock and criticize him endlessly, but major artists were starting to actively seek him out for collabs. For one, Skyfall, Mamacita, he and Travis Scott trading hypnotic verses over psychedelic beats. After being re-released in 2024 for its 10-year anniversary, Days Before Rodeo would become the 4th best-selling rap album of 2024, a decade after it first dropped. And the contributions that Youngthugg had on that record were a big part of that. And so while the public simply didn't understand him, other rappers were starting to realize just how unique he was. T.I., one of the most legendary rappers from Atlanta, would describe Youngthugg's early career like this. What's it like to chase your dreams in Atlanta? To start off with nothing, to start off in Jonesboro South. It would be likened to the idea of walking into a store and buying a lottery ticket and getting the mega millions. He didn't come from a family that knew how to get him in front of people. These kids were running the streets, lost. And at the time, he didn't have a talent that was easily recognizable by the people who were in a position. So he had to work a Rubik's Cube to find himself in a position not only where he could present his art to people, but to where the people he was presenting to could actually understand. The journalist asked because he was ahead of his time, and T.I. replied, completely ahead of it. He still is today. Then he dropped Best Friend, the platinum-certified single with playful flows and unforgettable melodies. Take Care with Lil Wayne, where he sounds like Louis Armstrong impersonating the Cookie Monster. Then there was Good Times in 2015, where Thugg raps colorfully on top of a playful UK garage beat by Jamie XX, merging trap and UK garage in a way that had never been done before. Then there was Throw Some Mo off Ray Shremmer's Shrem Life, featuring a rapid-fire verse from Thugg. That would become one of the most streamed songs off the 3 times platinum album, and that's only a few of the iconic cult classic songs that Youngthugg was on back then. And if you look back now, many of Thugg's verses from these early days of Atlanta's trap wave laid the foundation for the genre truly breaking into the mainstream a couple of years later. But at the same time, he was still just getting started. And so after a few years of prolific output, people's perception of Youngthugg was changing. Lifestyle being a big song that most people saw as a meme, that alone didn't make him a star. But 9 or 10 more hits after that was a step in the right direction. And at the same time, trap music was exploding in popularity. By 2015, it was pretty obvious that the trap sound was going to define the next era of mainstream hip-hop, and Youngthugg was starting to play a pivotal role in that new generation. But after locking in and dropping all these cult hits, building up a fan base that actually loved him, he was now in the exact position where most artists would have to play it safe. Most people would have to gravitate towards a more commercial sound when they're trying to build a bigger audience. But Youngthugg in 2015 wasn't most artists, because instead, he was going to double down on his own unique artistic vision, because the mixtape run he would go on from 2015 to 2017 would somehow be even more insane than what he had already done, and massively more popular at the same time. In 2016, he drops a song called Harambe, where his vocals can only be compared to 3 things that exist on Earth: the jazz legend Louis Armstrong, a broken instrument, and the gorilla it was named after. On Harambe, Thugg alternates between guttural screams and growls, hoarse singing, and ad-libs that sound like they're being torn straight out of his mouth. Even his delivery was the same. On this song, he completely abandoned conventional rap flows to create a song that sounds a lot more like an experimental jazz performance than a trap song.
Whoa,
Flows create a song that sounds a lot more like an experimental jazz performance than a trap song. But even though Harambe didn't really become a hit, and it's not even most people's favorite Thugg song, I've never been able to forget it. For me personally, it's the perfect example of why Youngthugg is actually a musical genius. If you listen to the instrumental off Harambe and then you pay attention to what he does with his voice on this song, it's very difficult to imagine how he came up with the complexity of the melody and the flow while keeping it all on the beat. You can really do this with like 80% of the songs Thugg's ever made. The flows and the melodies that he comes up with all work, but it also makes no sense. It hurts my brain to even try and think about how you can come up with something like this. And that's what I mean when I say it's abstract. His flows, his voice, he's not someone who's going to go into the studio and just make a song with a regular old trap triplet flow. He's someone who's coming up with something completely unique, completely abstract, stuff that no one else has done before. And for me personally, and millions of other people, that's why Youngthugg is one of the most interesting artists of the last generation. But somehow, though, Harambe wasn't even the most notable moment of the Jeffrey mixtape. I think what got the most attention from this project was the controversy of Thugg wearing a giant lavender skirt with arm wraps and a white shirt for the album cover. It was already publicly known that Thugg had been kind of into women's clothes for years, but this was different. This was a giant statement about not giving a fuck what anyone thinks.
When you do put on the dress, like, is that more for shock, or is that just what the vibe that you on at that time? No, it's just like, fuck, I wanted a cheetah print long shirt. I couldn't find one. I seen this, I'm like, yo, this shit is, and it's just like, I wasn't thinking at all. It wasn't even I'm finna try to shock the world, I'm finna clout. I don't care about clout. Yeah.
Borrowing the dress from an Italian designer from Milan, him in the dress on the album cover had this giant, dramatic, theatrical look that went against every expectation for how a rap artist should dress, and people's reactions were intense and polarizing. Some people praised Youngthugg for challenging gender norms in hip-hop. People were writing think pieces about what an eccentric genius he was, but other people also used it as yet more fuel for mocking him.
Yeah, this nigga put the dress on for attention. You did that shit because you knew, man, ain't nothing nobody can say about me because I'm real out here and I'm thorough and this shit gonna get me a lot of burns. I'm finna do it.
Years later, though, the Jeffrey dress would end up touring museums around the world as part of an exhibit for gender bending in fashion, visiting cities like Boston, Amsterdam, and more. And the exhibit included a quote from Youngthugg. It said, "The garment aligned with Youngthugg's personal beliefs. In my world, you can be a gangster with a dress, or you can be a gangster with baggy pants. I feel like there's no such thing as gender." Jeffrey as a whole probably did become one of Youngthugg's most iconic projects, but it was still just one small piece of the puzzle with everything he was doing back then. Barter 6 was his first true introduction to the mainstream at the start of 2015. It was ranked by many publications as one of the best albums of the year, and it was his first project to hit the Billboard charts with the most polished production of any of his projects to date. It also created some pretty huge cult hits like Halftime and Check, and Slime Season 1 and 2 came out just a couple months after that. These were massive mixtapes that showcased Thugg's most completely unfiltered, insane flows, and they became huge hits among his biggest fans with their abstract psychedelic sound. One critic wrote, "As always, Thugg pulls melodies out of thin air as he raps like the walls are closing in around him. Songs like Rari and Mine and Take Care with Lil Wayne are still some of my favorites Thugg has ever made to this day." But then after that, just 3 months later, he dropped I'm Up, and this mixtape would be much shorter, but it still has a ton of iconic songs packed in with frantic production and some of the most insane flows he had used yet. The beat from For My People feels more like an ASMR noise than a trap song, but he somehow floats on it anyway. And then Hercules is an insane 5-minute masterpiece where you hear him snarling, screaming, floating, and transforming on top of dark, imposing organs and thundering bass. Despite the simplicity, he was delivering an energy like no one else at the time.
I'll make your bitch stop. I say something on TikTok. House cookies, no Briscoe. I just bought a Cuban link. Flooded. Big fries. Bitches trying to do that me.
And then, less than 5 months after that, he dropped Jeffrey, which would become one of the most loved projects he ever made, with critics calling it the best album of 2016, an amazing blend of extreme excitement and mainstream appeal. Rolling Stone would write that Jeffrey made Thugg the most captivating vocalist in popular music as a whole, with a bonus track Pick Up the Phone eventually being certified 5 times platinum thanks to his hook. And then, only 9 months after that, he came back with Beautiful Thugger Girls, one of my personal favorites he's ever made, with the most unexpected sound of anything he had done so far. This mixtape was country trap, and it featured some of Thugg's most raw, sensitive vocals on songs like Family Don't Matter and Daddy's Birthday, with subject matter around love, family, and relationships. Just 3 months after that, he and Future dropped Super Slimy, a collaborative mixtape that debuted at number 2 on the Billboard charts, his highest placement yet. At this point, Youngthugg finally, after 5 years and dozens of projects, actually left the studio. For the first time since 2011, he would go a year without releasing much music at all. And the reason for that was because his job was completed. He had spent the last half-decade of his life making music non-stop, dropping more than 15 full-length projects, all of them iconic in their own way, in the same amount of time that it would take most artists to do 1 or 2. In reality, though, when you actually compare his earliest work to what he was dropping by the time Jeffrey came out, Youngthugg himself hadn't changed much at all. Pikachu from 2012 wasn't vastly different from what he was doing in the Jeffrey era. In a lot of ways, he mostly sounds the same. And so the reason why Youngthugg went from being a rapper who was essentially a punchline for other people to someone who could style runway shows and make hits, becoming an icon, it was because the world had finally caught up to his vision. In 2018, he was making some of the freshest music around. In 2013, he sounded the same, but the world wasn't ready yet. He had come in with a style and a voice that no one could understand. Sometimes metaphorically, but sometimes literally, people just couldn't understand him. And at first, he was ridiculed, but by the end, he was a star. Because not long after dropping Super Slimy with Future, Youngthug's style had so much momentum that he actually started topping the charts as an honest-to-God mainstream star. When he was featured on Havana by Camila Cabello, that song would become his first #1 hit, earning him a diamond plaque not just in the US, but literally all over the world, with the track having over 2 billion Spotify plays today. He also made a few appearances on Drake's cult classic mixtape More Life, on Ice Melts and Sacrifices, the latter of which is one of my favorite verses he ever did. Not long after that, his song Goodbyes with Post Malone would rack up 1.5 billion streams on Spotify. And in the summer of 2018, he co-wrote and did background vocals for Childish Gambino's This Is America, which would be another #1 song on the Billboard charts for him, earning him a Grammy for Record of the Year, while the song was certified 5 times platinum. And so by the end of this run, Youngthugg was pretty solidified. The influence, the presence, the cult popularity, the mainstream success, it was undeniable. It was clear that he had made a mark in hip-hop and pop music in general forever. But what he did next would be to make sure that no one could ever say he didn't. Because along the way, Youngthugg had started his own label imprint, just like 1017 that Gucci Mane signed him to back in 2012. And so in the late 2010s, YSL would create a new generation of stars, all influenced by Thugg's unique approach to music, helping launch some of the most popular artists of that time, people like Gunna, Lil Baby, NBA Youngboy, Lil Keed, and many more. At the same time, though, in many cases, it would go much deeper than music itself. After dropping out of high school in the 9th grade, Dominique Jones was a teenager making a living by dealing drugs on the southwest side of Atlanta. By the time he was 17, he was spending time around recording studios affiliated with a lot of the popular local rappers at the time. And before long, the people around him, including the founders of Quality Control Music, started trying to convince him to seriously try music instead of being so close to the streets and risking jail time or worse. But he was reluctant to give up the easy money, and his family needed him to be bringing in that income. But in 2014, he was sent to prison for 2 years after being convicted of drug charges. When he got out, though, he wasn't greeted by a cold, unfamiliar world. Instead, Youngthugg came and gave him $50,000 to start making music and stay out of the streets for good. 6 months later, his debut mixtape was released, with features from Youngthugg, Gunna, and more. And in the years after he got started, Lil Baby would drop countless hits and release some of the most loved and best-selling mainstream trap albums of his era, with My Turn being the best-selling album of 2020 in any genre. And that's only one person that Youngthugg helped build from the ground up. Gunna is an artist also from Atlanta who first appeared in a mainstream capacity on the song Floyd Mayweather from Youngthugg's Jeffrey, but it wouldn't be long before he started building an empire of his own. Releasing projects like Drip Season, Drip Harder, and Wanna, he quickly became loved for his smooth vocals and flows. Drip Too Hard with Lil Baby racked up over 1.6 billion plays on Spotify, while collabs between Youngthugg and Gunna became legendary for their complementary styles and flows. Three-Headed Snake, Hot, Scoliosis, Chanel, Dollars on My Head, Youngthugg and Gunna were an inseparable duo in and out of music. Within a couple of years, Gunna was competing for chart positions against artists like The Weeknd, and he was winning. Today, both Lil Baby and Gunna have more monthly listeners than Youngthugg himself, but they really only got started thanks to him helping them out. It's just one more example of Youngthugg being one of the most influential figures in modern hip-hop. When Thugg finally dropped his debut studio album, So Much Fun, on his 28th birthday in 2019, after dozens of mixtapes, trap music had become bigger than ever. 5 or 6 years before, the new trap sound had been quickly gaining steam, and Thugg was big in that movement, but it was still kind of indie, it was underground, and it wasn't all that commercialized back then. But after a couple of years, it had become the default sound of pop rap, even bleeding a little bit into mainstream pop, and Thugg was bigger than ever. Not only had he been on some major pop hits and had his own hits as well, but he had birthed a ton of artists who all took from his style on top of that. And So Much Fun was his biggest project yet. Songs like Bad Bad Bad, The London, Hot, they were huge hits. And being his first project to debut at #1 on the Billboard charts, it was a huge success. And the same went for Punk, which came out 2 years later. Again, it debuted at #1, it had a huge rollout, all the marketing power behind it, and some of the tracks did do well, but for replay value, it was oddly lacking. A lot of Youngthugg's flows on his later projects were simpler triplet flows without the same bombastic energy of his older music. The lyrics would be more generic, they would lack the shock value he used to have. Even his vocals would be more conservative, lacking the insane vocal runs, the melodies he used to produce at a rapid rate. And so despite, or maybe because So Much Fun and Punk were his biggest, most expensive albums yet, it kind of lacked the character he was always known for. Critics, fans, the average listener, people were a lot less thrilled by what Youngthugg was putting out. He was still bigger than ever, like I mentioned, with more industry push, more money. In 2021, he had another #1 hit, Way Too Sexy, with Drake and Future, and both Drake and Future said that the song wouldn't have been possible without him, but at the same time, people were a lot less excited by new Youngthugg music than they were before. But before Youngthugg could come back with a bigger, better project, in May of 2022, he and 28 other YSL affiliates were indicted on a 56-count Georgia RICO Act charge, alleging that his record label was not a crew of rappers, but that they were a gang with murderous control over Atlanta's criminal underworld, with the main charge being participation in criminal street gang activity. He was denied bond multiple times before the trial began, facing up to 125 years in prison. And because of his notoriety in Georgia, being one of the biggest rappers out of the South at the time, it took over a year to select an unbiased jury, with many more jurors being disqualified even after they were selected. But that wasn't all. Once the trial did finally start, 2 judges were recused for conflicts of interest. But as the trial panned out, the very menacing charges that carried a possibly over 100-year prison sentence started to make less and less sense. If the charges against Youngthugg sounded unclear, it's because they were. The way that RICO charges work is that he could be convicted of anything anyone in YSL had ever done wrong. But as the trial went on, it became clear that the state of Georgia didn't really have enough evidence to convict anyone, let alone Thugg. Being admonished by the judge multiple times over disorganized presentation and dishonest tactics in the courtroom, the prosecution's attacks were starting to fall apart. Eventually, it got to a point where the judge strongly suggested that both sides come together to figure out a plea deal, wanting to avoid a mistrial that would waste massive amounts of time and money after redacted information was accidentally revealed to the jury. Plea deal negotiations took days, with the defense asking for Thugg to go home immediately on house arrest, while prosecutors advised for him to get 45 years in prison. It all came to a head, though, when the judge called out that the prosecutors had previously been willing to let him out immediately if he would testify against his co-defendants, begging the question of whether or not they saw him as a threat or they were just trying to make an example out of him.
It's the final act.
Co-defendants, begging the question of whether or not they saw him as a threat or they were just trying to make an example out of him. As Judge Reese Whitaker noted in her closing remarks, the prosecution's initial offer of probation, which they then took back, seemingly conceded that they didn't think Thugg was a danger to the community. While some of the people around Thugg had allegedly committed violent crimes, they didn't seem to have much tie to the rapper himself besides text records, rap lyrics, and social media posts that they hoped would collectively paint a menacing portrait to the jury. And so ultimately, Thugg agreed to a blind plea. Instead of trying to negotiate with the prosecutors who seemed to be clearly acting in bad faith, he put his fate in the hands of Judge Whitaker, and that move paid off. Later that same day, the judge sentenced him to 15 years probation with no time served in prison, allowing him to go home later that same day. In the end, by the time Thugg was released, it had become the longest trial in the history of the state of Georgia. If you want to see the whole documentary we made covering the insanity of the YSL trial, you can click on the screen to check that out. The trial also exposed fractures in the YSL Brotherhood, when Gunna accepted
He
an
been a
Alfred plea
rat.
deal in
He
December
was
of
on
2022, getting out of jail
Turnstile.
2 years before Thugg. Despite maintaining his innocence and denying testimony against others, many people saw this as a kind of betrayal. The controversy effectively ended his musical partnership and friendship with Thugg. Even though Gunna's career continued to flourish commercially, he's been rejected by most of the people in the industry at large. But now, there are a lot of questions about what's going to happen with Youngthugg's music going forward. He's rolling out an album called UY Scooty, named after a red hypergiant star with a volume 750 million times larger than our sun, currently being the largest star in the known universe. And that's just kind of how he sees himself. It's how he's always seen himself. But he has a lot to prove right now. His last project, So Much Fun, Punk, and Business is Business, they charted higher than his previous work. But they left a lot of his fans feeling like he had sold out and made his music more generic. And so there's a general sense that Thugg lost the creative spark that pushed him to make all those mixtapes back in the day. He literally doesn't sound the same anymore. His voice lacks the energy and the raw guttural flows of his older songs. He might be doing more numbers than ever before, but overall, he might have lost the experimental edge that made him so influential in the first place. But he wasn't the only one. General interest in trap music has gone down since COVID, with a lot of fans talking about the genre becoming stale, repetitive, and uninspired in the last few years. It's no longer the sound that any rising artist can just go viral with anymore. And so maybe pop trap really is dead, and no one, let alone Youngthugg, could bring it back. But by the time the world recognized his talent and stopped laughing at him for it, he had already become one of the most influential artists alive. In 2019, they were writing articles called Why Youngthugg is the 21st Century's Most Influential Artist, because he didn't just make countless hits of his own and build up a giant cult fan base with some classic projects, but he also inspired the new default sound of pop rap. Lil Uzi, Gunna, Lil Baby, Playboi Carti, these are some of the biggest hit makers of the current generation of rappers, and they've all copied his ideas and sounds in one way or another. But the craziest part of that is that most of them only managed to master one or two of his flows, never fully recreating the entire style. Even Lil Nas X would later say that Youngthugg was a huge inspiration for Old Town Road after that song became the highest certified song ever with 17 platinum plaques in the US. That's not even to mention the dozens, if not hundreds, of underground artists who emulate Thugg's voice, his playbook, his style, and his flows. He's still influential now. Nine Vicious is an up-and-coming 22-year-old underground artist who outwardly idolizes Thugg, copying a lot of the moves that Thugg was making 10 years ago or more. And he's just one example of the underground still copying Thugg's moves an entire generation later. Even Playboi Carti's I Am Music, the most highly anticipated and best-selling rap album of 2025 so far, contains multiple ad-libs, flows, and voices that are clearly directly inspired by music that Youngthugg made over 10 years ago. And so maybe Youngthugg never fell off at all. When you listen to his music from back in the day, 10 years ago or more, it's so far ahead of its time that it basically still sounds brand new right now. And so if that doesn't make him one of the most influential rappers to have ever picked up a mic, I don't know what would. So it's hard to not be inspired when you really hear about Youngthugg's story. He starts off in one of the most infamously violent, treacherous housing projects in Atlanta, and he's the 10th of 11 kids in a poor family. While he's a kid, he watches one of his brothers get murdered, and his father spends time in and out of prison, away from the home. He goes on to end up in the streets at 9 years old. He spends years in juvenile detention for breaking his teacher's arm, at the same time as he was getting in trouble at home for trying to go to school in girls' clothes. He would later say that he didn't start rapping out of any artistic or creative urge, but because he wanted to make money and get out of the trenches. He said, anyone with a brain can rap, so I did it. But once he started rapping, it would turn out that he had a voice unlike anyone else around him. But at first, he was hated. People would call him gay, a loser, a bad rapper. He was a joke. His style was so different and so unexpected that it was downright insulting to the rules of what hip-hop even is. Remember all the people I listed at the beginning of the video? That was kind of a bit, obviously, but it also wasn't. Because everyone that I listed is like, no argument, some of the most loved artists to have ever lived, but they were also all hated when they came out and started expressing themselves in front of people. In his time, Van Gogh's painting style would be ragged on as unfinished and sloppy. Other painters at the time felt like it was a violation of the rules of painting. But 150 years later, Van Gogh's paintings still move people around the world. His critics, though, are often forgotten. And Prince was also endlessly dissected by critics in the media for the way he expressed himself and the themes of his music. But today, he's one of the most loved pop artists ever. When the Beatles first got famous, they were considered to be a band for kids, with people making fun of their appearances, their songs, their performances. But 60 years later, the whole world sees that they changed the entire future of music forever. And so when people called Youngthugg a gay loser, he just kept going. He practically lived in the studio while he made music to prove his point. And after a couple of years of constant work, he was a star. But even when that recognition came, he never started to make sense. A violent gang leader, a gangster rapper, at one point facing 100 years in prison, but at the same time he's wearing dresses, painting his nails, telling the world he has no gender, singing in a high feminine voice in between the guttural screams and the yelling. And so even now, after the subgenre that he helped pioneer became the face of mainstream hip-hop, he's still widely disliked and misunderstood. But if you go back and listen to a Youngthugg song from 2013, you'll hear it immediately. He was ready and real from the beginning. Whether or not you like his music, he's probably the greatest manifestation of authenticity that hip-hop has ever seen. It was never a performance. It was never an act. It was never a marketing tactic. He was doing what he knew how to do. He was doing what he wanted. It was the rest of the world that had to figure out how to catch up. And some people will still be trying to catch up forever.
That's a fact, though. Crip. Especially if you ain't got no brain. Hey, man, say, man, stop hating on Youngthugg and put that nigga back where he was at, man. Come on, turn up. Alright, we're back. So y'all see from that situation, bruh. Like I said, bruh, these motherfuckers, they can shoot a police officer and nothing happened to me. They can shoot, not the police officer, the police officer can shoot a black person, nothing happened to him. The most thing they get is a slap on the wrist and say, hey, you quit from the force. Black nigga kill a police officer, death penalty, prison, torture, or they'll kill you. You know what I'm saying? So it's just like, the rules, we're not going by these stanky ass rules no more. Fuck these rules. Fuck 12, fuck the society rules, fuck all these rules they got. They some pussies. Also, Thugg quitting rap, man. People gotta understand that Thugg is in a bad situation. He got 15 years of probation with other BS shit. So that means, Crip, if he do anything, he sniffed the wrong way, 12 is on they ass. You know what I'm saying? Everything Thugg do, they gonna be watching it. He's in a horrible situation because he ain't gonna be able to talk the way he wanna talk. He ain't gonna be able to hang with the people he wanna hang out with. He ain't gonna be able to do the things he wanna do. So he gotta do what he gotta do. If streaming the next biggest thing that he feels gonna help his brand, help him continue to create his creativity, Crip, you gotta do what you gotta do. As far as we see in his rap videos and how he came up, Thugg was always the next person to keep on figuring out what's the next new thing and how to create his own way. So I believe that he can do wherever he got his mind to. At the end of the day, like I said, man, God gonna always put us through testings. It's up to us how we gonna handle it. So I feel like Thugg, he gonna handle it the way he's gonna handle it. But the enemy gonna always look to try to stop what we got going. So I just pray Thugg can stay out the pokey. However you want to do it. And we got the bitch hood and outside Crip. Just don't quit that music.
Hey, Dad, you know, dog, when we link up, dog, this shit be legendary. You know this instrumental, you the engineer on it, so Kodak everywhere.